What's up everyone, Dapperblade here with a Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Wilds. In this video, we are going to bring you a complete guide to Omega Planetes, how to beat it, how to complete the Savage version event quest, and more. Now there are 3 quests that involve Omega Planetes. You have the assignment, the optional quest, and the event quest which involves Savage Omega. But how do you unlock these? Well, first of all, you have to talk to Rove in the Iceshard Cliffs. This will initiate the quest line in order to unlock all of these hunts. This will give you access to the special assignment version of the quest first, to which this hunt can be completed multiple times afterwards by taking on the optional quest, and then finally when you're ready to take on Savage Omega, you can take on the event quest that involves that version of the monster. The special assignment questline also has you taking on a Nerscylla clone first before actually taking on Omega Planetes. This version of Nerscylla is fairly straightforward, although it utilizes a few more beam attacks than the normal Nerscylla we're used to. Now, Omega Planetes is not a normal hunt. As it's the collaboration event with Final Fantasy, it takes certain mechanics from Final Fantasy XIV and applies them to Monster Hunter Wilds. These include hunters having to take on certain roles such as tank, DPS and healer, attacks that are indicated by certain glowing red zones or other indicators, telling players where the attacks are going to land, and the hunt being divided into certain phases, each getting more difficult. In this guide we will go over each of the moves that Omega Planetes performs, as well as the moves that are slightly altered for the Savage version of the hunt. I'll try to give you tips and tricks on how to beat the monster, and the rewards you can get for completing the hunt. So let's jump into this. First of all, I'll talk about the structure of the hunt. Omega Planetes, regardless if you're fighting the normal version of the monster or the Savage version, is divided into 4 phases. This all takes place in the same arena that you fight Jinder Hard. Phase 1 is fairly simple. Omega Planetes will use some of its more basic moves, being more frequent and using them more often during the Savage version of the hunt, but there isn't anything unique that you have to worry about per se. After enough damage is done, it will move to the next location to start Phase 2. Phase 2 is much the same as Phase 1, however it's a little bit more aggressive, but on top of that, you're able to make use of certain environmental factors like dropping rocks to deal some additional damage. Again, after enough damage is dealt, it will move to the next arena to start Phase 3. Now Phase 3 is when things get a little bit more tricky, shall we say. On top of it using its moves more often and more aggressively, there will be more rocks that you can use to drop onto Omega Planetes' head. There is even an ice wall that you can bring down on top of the monster for a massive amount of damage and stunning it. But the most unique thing about Phase 3 is what people like to call the DPS check. When enough damage is dealt to Omega Planetes, it will start to perform what is known as the Delta attack. This is its ultimate attack, which we'll talk about a bit more in detail later. But basically, during this attack, it will summon a Nerscylla clone. This clone has to be destroyed as quick as possible in order for you to have the defenses via a shield to protect yourself from the Delta attack. If you survive this, the rest of the phase continues normally until it moves to the final location and the start of Phase 4. Phase 4, it doesn't really have any ultimate attack, but it is incredibly aggressive. It will use its moves constantly with very little time for you to attack, unless you're making use of the Iron mechanic, which again is another mechanic we'll talk about in a bit. But should you survive the onslaught of Phase 4, then you would have successfully completed the hunt. Now we know about the structure of the hunt, let's talk a little bit about preparing for the hunt. First of all, when it comes to your items, you'll want to go into this hunt with as many consumables as possible, especially when it comes to healing. A hot drink is also required in order to counteract the cold environment we will be fighting Omega in. This also can run out mid-hunt, so keep an eye on your stamina bar. Being able to craft additional potions, especially max potions as well, on the fly in the middle of the hunt is also advisable and will definitely help with your survivability. Don't go into this hunt half-assed when it comes to your items. When it comes to Omega Planetes itself as well, it is advisable to go into this hunt with 2 weapons. One, a thunder weapon, the other, a fire weapon. Whether they're the same type of weapon, it's down to personal preference. This is because Omega Planetes, its main weakness is thunder. Dragon can be a substitute to that if you don't have a thunder weapon. However, we're taking a fire weapon for the Nerscylla clone. As we need as much DPS to bring the Nerscylla clone down, as mentioned in the phase section of this video, you'll want to bring that fire weapon to enable you to deal as much damage as possible in the small time frame you have to take down the spider. The final aspect of preparation you need to consider is party composition. As this is a Final Fantasy inspired hunt, we have to consider certain roles for our characters. DPS, tank, and healer being the main 3 roles. First of all, when it comes to the tanking role, the tank has to focus on survival and maintaining Omega Planetes' ire, which another term would be aggro. Deal enough damage to the head and you'll gain Omega Planetes' aggro, which means that the majority of its attacks will be focused on you. Any shielded weapon can definitely help when it comes to surviving the onslaught of attacks that will be coming your way. Utilizing guard and guard up will also add to your survivability. Guard up being an actual requirement to block some of the attacks. You can kind of dodge tank this with the dual blades or the bow, but it is more advisable to use a shielded weapon if you're wanting to take on the tank role. Shielded weapons include the lance, gun lance, sword and shield, charge blade, heavy bowgun, and at a push, the greatsword. There is a little bit more nuance to it in the later phases of the hunt, but we'll talk about that when we get to the moves of the monster. The next role is the healer. The healer or support role needs to make sure that everyone is kept alive. You don't really need to pick a specific weapon for this role, but you need to make sure that your build has certain skills, such as the wide range being essential, so your heals will affect your allies. Free meal and speed eating are also advisable. This way, when you consume a potion, it will heal your entire team. Keeping an eye on your allies' health bars is essential for this role, and I would strongly advise bringing more materials to craft more potions on the fly, or checking your Sacred's pouch to top up on potions when you get low. In the later phases, you may feel frustrated as you may not be doing much damage, as the majority of your focus will be on healing your allies rather than dishing out damage to the monsters, but this is okay as you are keeping everyone alive. The final role is the DPS, and this is really straightforward. Most Monster Hunter players probably have this mindset. All you have to do is focus on dealing as much damage as you can whilst avoiding the attacks, especially when the tank does not have aggro. Most of Omega Planetes' attacks do have glowing red indicators, so as long as you're not being greedy and standing in the fire, avoiding these attacks should be quite simple. If you're having trouble avoiding the attacks, regardless of what weapon you're using to deal damage, consider bringing skills like guard up, guard, or if you're not using a shielded weapon, evade extender. Also, when taking on the Omega Planetes hunt, there is one aspect and mechanic that you have to be aware of, which is the monster's ire, otherwise known as aggro. This is indicated by a red beam from the monster's eye to the hunter who has said ire. You obtain this by dealing enough damage to the monster's head, after which, when you have achieved the ire or aggro, the majority of attacks, not all of them, but the vast majority of attacks will be targeted against that player, thus the reason we have a tank. Ire can change if other players start attacking the head as well, so keep this in mind. Now there is one more preparation or mechanic that we need to talk about before we actually get into the moves, and that is the Dome Shield. The Dome Shield is a certain protective element of Omega Planetes. After performing a focus strike to the head of the monster and destroying a wound on its head, you're able to create a Dome Shield. This shield stays in place, but will protect you from any of Omega's attacks bar the physical attacks. There are also other ways to create Dome Shields. For example, certain items can be looted from severed body parts to give you a slinger, a power generator slinger that can also be used to craft a Dome Shield. There are also certain adds that can be destroyed that in turn will also create Dome Shields. This is a way to give your tank a breather or to help your team survive the more dangerous attacks that Omega can perform. I'll talk about this now, as when I'm talking about the moves, there'll be times where I talk about the Dome Shield being a key way to avoid this attack. But anyway, let's move on to the next portion of this guide and talk about the moves that Omega Planetes has. Now, most of these moves are available to both Savage and the regular version of Omega. However, if there is a move that is unique to one, I will mention it. For the most part though, the main difference when it comes to the moves between the normal version of Omega and the Savage version is the frequency of how often it performs said moves and the reduced window of opportunity for hunters to attack Omega Planetes between moves. Now the moves I'm going to talk about in no particular order, although I'm going to try my best to tackle the moves that you will see first to last. So first of all is the Rocket Punch. The Rocket Punch is a move where Omega launches a rocket fist from its back that chases after players. You'll have a little homing icon on your player via a red targeting line, after which the rocket fist will chase down your player. If you're playing the normal version of Omega Planetes, it will start off by firing only 2 rocket fists. However, in the later phases, as well as if you're facing the Savage version of Omega, there will be a lot more than just 2 fists. These can be shot out of the sky with ranged weapons, blocked or dodged, or just simply hit to destroy them. When Omega is performing this move, you do have a few seconds to attack it before the rocket fists reach your location. The next attack is the Atomic Ray. This causes Omega to shoot multiple lasers in a cone from either its front, left, right or back sides. During the early phases of the hunt, it will do these in one direction, but as the fight progresses and you get to the later phases, it can shoot them out of multiple directions, potentially shooting them out of all sides. These are pretty well telegraphed, so they are pretty easy to avoid, especially if you have guard and guard up. They can also be used in conjunction with other moves as the fight goes on, to which one of these other moves is the Ballistic Impact. This will allow Omega to launch bombs into the air, leaving an AoE orange marker on a player's location to where the bomb will land. After a short delay, they will hit the location, detonating and causing damage to players if they're still in that orange AoE marker. Evade Extender definitely helps avoiding this if you don't have a blocking weapon. The next move is simply called the Flamethrower. This allows Omega to shoot flames from underneath its body in 4 directions, one in the front, back, left and right. This is avoidable as there is a glowing orange indicator to where the flames will appear. In the later phases, as well as if you're fighting the Savage version of the monster, this could be performed up to 3 times in a row. So be aware of this and adjust your position accordingly. Please note that you can block this attack, but it does require guard up. The next move available to Omega is Omega Micros. These allow the monster to launch little mini Omegas that will chase down hunters before jumping on them and exploding. Now the interesting thing about this move is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes one of these micro Omegas will be glowing white or light blue. This indicates that when it's destroyed via hunters, not via exploding by jumping at a player, it will create a dome shield that players can use to avoid incoming attacks. You can kind of kite these monsters a little bit by using the sonic bombs or screamer pods, but it's not always required. The next move is another flamethrower move dubbed the Chariot Flamethrower. This causes Omega to deal a small AoE flamethrower burst directly underneath it, knocking back hunters. This also deals Fire Blight. Well, all the flame attacks deal Fire Blight. This is easily avoidable by backing off, and you can tell when Omega is going to perform this as the area directly underneath it will start glowing red and orange. You are able to block this again if you have guard up. The next attack I didn't really find a proper name for, or an official name as far as I'm aware, so if you do know it, please leave a comment down below, but I refer to it as the little lasers. These are just a few little shots that Omega will fire off at random party members or whoever has its ire. The next 3 moves are basically the physical moves that Omega has access to. First of all is a Foot Slam, to which it will use one of its 4 limbs to slam down on a hunter's location. The next is a Body Slam, to which it will jump to a hunter's location, and if the hunter isn't evading or blocking, it will knock them back. And the final physical attack is a Charge Attack, which could be considered the most deadly out of the 3 physical attacks that Omega has. After a short wind up, Omega will lift its legs and charge forward using its thrusters, knocking over any hunter it comes into contact with. Whilst in the early phases this isn't super deadly, in the later ones it can charge multiple times in a row, catching hunters unaware and easily carting them. Remember when it comes to physical attacks that the dome shield won't protect you from them, but if you're using a shielded weapon, should you block these attacks, there's a chance that you can power clash against them. giving you and your teammates an opportunity to attack Omega. The next attack Omega has available to it is the Mustard Bomb. One player out of the party gets a large AoE marker that will follow them around. After a short delay, Omega will then launch the Mustard Bomb to where that player's location is, damaging them and leaving a puddle of fire on the floor. This fire damages anyone in it, so it is wise for the targeted hunter to move the Mustard Bomb away from the group and away from where everyone is fighting Omega. The AoE marker for the Mustard Bomb is slightly different to other AoE markers as 1, it follows the player, and 2, it pulses a bit. So when you have this on you, do all you can to get it away from the group and the combat area. The only exception for this is that if the shield dome is up and available for you, then you can protect yourself from the Mustard Bomb by standing in the bubble, which will prevent the Mustard Bomb from landing and creating that puddle of fire. The next attack is simply referred to as the laser attack. This shoots a large laser beam directly in front of Planetes. It normally repositions before performing this, and you can normally tell when it's going to perform this as well via it lifting all of its legs up and hovering slightly. The laser beam itself lasts for a few seconds, and it can be blocked with guard up, which will protect allies behind the hunter who is guarding, but it is best to get out of the way of it simply by moving around the sides of Omega. Dual blade and bow users can also dodge through this if they need to, so there are ways to survive this. However, if you do get hit, it will hurt, potentially stunning you and leaving you vulnerable to follow-up attacks from Omega. The next attack, well, more of an ability available to Omega, is known as the Pantocrator mode. This basically translates to an enraged mode that Omega Planetes activates. During this mode, it becomes aggressive, it will deal its harder hitting moves more often, and it's advisable for players to power it down as quickly as possible. This can be done by attacking enough wounds on its legs, to which links to the next move, which is the Flamethrower Frenzy. During this enraged state, it will sometimes perform the Flamethrower Frenzy, to which Omega will jump around the place in almost random patterns, dealing physical damage with its stomping attacks before following it up with a 4-direction flamethrower attack. He'll do this 3 times in a row, and the amount of flamethrowers shot out is increased after each stomp attack. However, if you survive this, then there will be a wound on each one of its legs for players to take advantage of. Enough damage done to the legs, done to the wounds on the legs, will power it down from its Pantocrator mode. The next attack is simply known as HP Penalty. Omega will shoot out a ball of black and white energy that will attack normally whoever has the monster's ire. It can be used against people if they don't have the ire, but for the most part, it's used against a tank. The HP penalty doesn't deal a lot of damage in of itself, but it instead debuffs a player, reducing their maximum HP, and this can stack. The issue is when you get too many stacks. When this happens, it is best for whoever is tanking Omega to switch with someone else, an off-tank maybe. This means that you have to communicate potentially with your other party members, or be astute enough to see that your tank has a lot of debuffs and try to take the heat off of them by gaining the monster's ire and allowing the debuff to wear off of the person who was originally tanking. You can dodge the HP penalty orb, but it's not always possible depending on the situation. The next attack is the MRV Missile Barrage, or MRV Missiles. This works in one of 2 ways. If no one has Omega's ire, then the monster will launch bombs into the air, targeting every hunter. This is indicated by big orange markers appearing underneath every player. After a short delay, the bomb will descend and explode on those markers. This will repeat 6 times in a row. The radius of these bombs is quite large, so you almost need to be constantly moving or dodging to avoid these 6 attacks. Because if you should get hit, it is hard to recover, and this can lead to many cars. Riding your Sacra is one way to avoid this. Taking skills like Evade Extender can also help, or if you have a guarding weapon, you can potentially block these attacks. However, should a player have the monster's ire, then the MRV missiles will simply be on that one player instead of the entire team. This is much more easier to control, especially if you have a good support who is able to heal through this. The next attack available to Omega is the Larboard and Starboard Wave Cannon. When the monster performs this, it will trace a half-circle laser to its left or right, Larboard being the left side, Starboard being the right side, to which after a second, a delayed explosion will detonate, causing significant damage. It can do this multiple times in a row as well, the more it's enraged, and depending on what phase you're in. This can be blocked with guard up and dodged through with certain weapons, and the monster will indicate it's doing this via the notification on the screen. The final move available to Omega is known as the Delta attack, which translated is the DPS check of this hunt. During phase 3, after a certain amount of damage has been done to Omega, it will initiate the Delta attack. It will fly around the map, becoming immune to damage while spawning mini Omegas. It will then sit at the back of the map, charging up its Delta attack. There is only one way to survive this attack, and that is via an enhanced dome shield. But how do you get this shield? Well, during the Delta attack itself, a Nerscylla clone will spawn. Players must defeat this monster as quickly as possible to generate that enhanced shield in order to block the Delta attack. But this isn't always easy. The Nerscylla clone moves about the map quite quickly. There's also those micro Omegas that you have to contend with. And on top of that, certain endemic life can spawn. Now, the endemic life being the Cacta and the Morbol seedlings. But the Morbol seedlings can be a little bit more tricky, as they have a breath attack that they will perform, indicated by a orange AoE indicator, that will cause them to unleash a bad breath frontal cone, dealing poison, paralysis and stench to enemies. This can be used against the Nerscylla clone if you time it correctly, and allow you to deal some uninterrupted damage to the monster. It should also be advised that the Nerscylla clone is severely weak to fire, so bringing fire weapons is advisable. I would also recommend using items such as might pills, anything to increase your DPS that little bit extra during this section. I also personally use the Rocksteady mantle to allow me to deal some extra uninterrupted damage and prevent me from being knocked back, at least by the Nerscylla clone or the micro Omegas. It won't protect you from the bad breath attack of the Morbol seedling, so keep this in mind. But anyway, once the Nerscylla clone is defeated, the enhanced dome shield will spawn and players can avoid the Delta attack by standing in it. The enhanced dome shield will also remain active for quite a while after the Delta attack, so it can be used as additional protection. So those are all the abilities and attacks that Omega Planetes has in its arsenal. But there are a few bits of information and tidbits, so to speak, to aid you in your fight. First of all, I'd recommend using Thunder weapons and Fire weapon. Thunder for Omega, Fire for the Nerscylla clone. Next up, I would also recommend taking as many potions into the hunt as possible, especially max potions, and the ability to craft more max potions in the middle of combat. The next tip is, of course, to have rolls allocated beforehand if possible, especially someone who is competent at taking the monster's ire and aggro and keeping the focus on them, protecting the other party members. The next tip is a lot of Omega's attacks are telegraphed, either via giant glowing orange indicators or by messages on the right of the screen. Also, when it comes to fighting this monster, you can mount it multiple times even, so always consider that when you're going into the hunt. The mounted finishers, if performed on the head, will also cause a dome shield to spawn, but sometimes it's best to save that and let the tank activate the wound on the head instead. You can potentially, if you want to, use paralysis on Omega, but it's not advisable. However, it's not immune to it. Out of the ailments, Blast seems to be the most effective if you don't want to go for a Thunder weapon. But to be honest, I'd advise a Thunder weapon, with the Artian or Lagiacrus weapons being my personal picks. Another tip is to always keep an eye out on the environment. There are multiple rocks that you can drop onto Omega, which will interrupt whatever attack it's performing, dealing massive damage. Also remember the Ice Wall in Phase 3, which deals not only massive damage, but also stuns Omega for a brief period of time. You can guarantee this Ice Wall falls on Omega after it performs the Delta attack if you're not confident at getting Omega positioned under the wall beforehand. The next tip I can give you is to focus on the two front legs, at least until they're broken once. Partbreaker can help with this, but the main reason why we are trying to take down and break the front legs is because it will topple the monster, whilst at the same time breaking off the protective cap protecting the joints of the leg. Picking it up gives you a slinger ammo known as the power generator that you can use to fire off and create your own dome shield. But there is another reason to why you want to break the legs as well. When toppled, players will have free reign to attack the antenna on top of Omega. This deals massive damage unless you're using ranged weapons. Which brings us on to another tip, which is when using the weapons, especially after the front legs have been broken, a rule of thumb is for whoever is tanking to go for the head, for blunt weapons and ranged weapons go for the front legs, and then for bladed weapons go for the rear legs. Like I said, going for the front legs though should be a priority so you can break them, knocking it over and dealing that massive damage to the antenna whilst also getting the power generator slinger dome shield. But of course, why would you want to do Omega Planetes? Well, it's for the rewards, as well as getting a Chocobo skin for your Sacred, as well as pendants. You'll also gain materials to craft the Bell armor set, which is a unique armor set that is perfect for greatswords, as well as make the Shadowbringer sword. You're also able to upgrade certain talismans, especially the Burst talisman, so you can get powerful gear out of this. You also are able to craft a Palico outfit, turning your little feline friend into a Morbol seedling. But once you've defeated Omega, you can replay the mission if you wanted to by going to the optional quest, or you could test your luck against the permanent event quest known as Planetes Protocol Savage, a 9-star high rank quest that requires hunters to be hunter rank 100 or above to participate in. This has us taking on a tempered Omega Planetes in the Rhyme Chain Peak, which is Jindahad's arena. This is what players call Savage Omega, and it could be seen as one of the ultimate challenges in Monster Hunter Wilds at the moment. But what makes it so challenging? Well, it takes all that we have learned already of Omega and enhances them, so the monster will have more health, it will hit harder, it performs its moves far more frequently, and it has access to almost all of its attacks during all of the phases, the main exception being the Delta attack, which is still restricted to phase 3. On top of that, it also has a new move available to it, stolen from Jindahad, which I simply refer to as the Ice Nova. This works similar to the Chariot Flamethrower attack, in that it will blast an ice wave underneath its body, damaging players and freezing them in place. This will leave players vulnerable and can potentially cause carts if they get hit by follow-up attacks. You can avoid being frozen by using a cleanser, blocking or evading the attack if you're using a weapon like the dual blades or bow. Apart from that, there are no real new moves, however it slightly edits some of the existing moves by causing them to be used more often, more times in a row, and of course hit a lot more harder. But why would you want to do Savage Omega? Well, that is for the rewards, namely the 2.0 tickets that allow you to craft the Omega Attire armor set. This is a universal armor set that definitely benefits playing in groups, which is fitting considering that you really need a group in order to complete Omega Planetes. You'll also get the ability to craft 2 new weapons, the Sword and Shield known as the Omega Sword, and the Insect Glaive known as the Omega Rod. This also comes with a new kinsect called the OMG. All the weapons that you get from Omega come with unique abilities, but I will talk about these more in dedicated build videos that use them. Finally, before I go, I should talk about the Soul of the Pictomancer, a unique item which, when it's in your inventory, allows you to perform Pictomancer moves from Final Fantasy. When using this, it performs one of 3 moves, which go in order. First of all, for using it, it will perform the Pom Motif, which can deal some nice KO damage. After which, after a certain cooldown, you can then perform the Wing Motif, a multi-hitting whirlwind move, and then the final move in the sequence is the Mog of Ages, which is a beam attack that can hit incredibly hard. The downside of the Pictomancer is, unfortunately, it does come with quite a long cooldown in between uses, but nonetheless, should your weapon be sheathed and you need something to do, they are quick enough to cast, so there's an extra option to deal some damage to the monster if needed. But there we have it, that is my guide to Omega Planetes and Savage Omega Planetes. We've gone through all the moves, as well as tips and tricks on how to beat this monster. I can't emphasize it enough that this monster really needs to be done in a group, and whilst yes, some people can do it solo, it's a bit of a slog. If you have to play it solo, or you don't have access to a group of players to play with, you can use the NPCs, as they are more than capable than some human players. Just make sure that you're using Kai and Alessa as Kai is an awesome support and Alessa is actually quite good at tanking. But this monster is quite in-depth, and I'm sure I wasn't able to cover everything during this video. So if you have anything to add, please leave a comment down below so other hunters can learn from our experiences. And until next time, I've been Darkblade, bringing you my guide to Omega Planetes in Monster Hunter Wilds. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.